It was June 1993, and children in caps and gowns filed across a gymnasium stage somewhere in South Central Los Angeles. Parents sat in bleachers, while teachers called names and handed out certificates. It was a sixth grade graduation, which is usually the kind of low-stakes, predictable event that most people would not think twice about attending, and even fewer would consider a risk. Jemeker Thompson attended anyway. She showed up wearing a wig, trying to hide her identity after she had been a federal fugitive for 2 years at that point, being one of the most wanted cocaine traffickers in the state of California, with a distribution network that stretched from Los Angeles into multiple states across the South and Midwest. The DEA had been building a file on her since the mid-1980s, and a federal grand jury had indicted her in April 1991 on charges of conspiracy to distribute cocaine and 5 counts of money laundering. The day that indictment came down, she was gone. She left Los Angeles, left her operation, and left her son. For 2 full years, she had stayed gone. Federal agents had made the same calculation Thompson had. They called the school ahead of time to get the graduation date, then they went and waited. Thompson later said she felt something was off the moment she walked into that gymnasium. She sat through the ceremony anyway. Plainclothes agents moved through the crowd while teachers still handed out diplomas, and when they reached her, they told her not to make a scene. In her own words, it was an inner feeling that I felt that, like, something wasn't right. What it was, I didn't know. The FBI came and told me, "Don't make a scene, you're under arrest." So I just asked the guy, I asked, "Can I please just hug my son?" And he let me hug my son. And they took me away and they walked me to the car. And I can remember just looking back, and I can see my son crying. She was led out in handcuffs in front of teachers, parents, and 12-year-olds who had no idea what they were watching. The arrest made headlines, not just because of who she was, but because of how they got her. She had risked capture for a single public moment as a mother, and it cost her everything. She was 31 years old. By the time they put her in that car, Thompson had spent the better part of a decade running one of the largest cocaine distribution networks in Los Angeles. She had supplied distributors across multiple U.S. cities. She had sourced product directly from producers in Colombia. She had laundered money through a legitimate hair extension business, bought property, and moved through the city in the kind of luxury that most of South Central could only look at from a distance. The DEA had been watching her for years and had not been able to build enough to move, not until her business partner Percy Cheese Bratton decided he would rather talk than go to prison. But the story did not start with Bratton. It did not start with the DEA. It did not even start with cocaine. It started with an 8-year-old girl standing on a sidewalk, watching her mother's belongings get thrown into the street. Thompson's origins and early rise with death. To understand Jemeker Thompson, you have to understand the specific place and specific moment she came out of. Because South Central Los Angeles in the late 1970s and early 1980s was not simply a rough neighborhood. It was a community in the middle of a collapse that the city around it refused to acknowledge. Manufacturing plants that had employed working-class black families for decades began closing in the 1960s and accelerated through the 1970s. The jobs did not come back. By the mid-1980s, historians describe South Central as having reached the nadir of its already difficult modern history, black unemployment rising, poverty widening, community programs losing funding under Reagan-era federal cuts. Young people came out of high school into a labor market that had no use for them in a neighborhood that had no safety net left. What moved into that vacuum was crack cocaine. One journalist covering South Central in 1984 described it this way. In 1984, Los Angeles was a city with 2 faces, one for the world, about the city of angels, and one for the residents, about the plague of the devil. They called it rock cocaine from about 1984 when it first took hold in LA. It hit the ghetto like a forest fire, and it was all over the inner city. The crack epidemic erupted in the early 1980s. Cheap to produce, cheap to buy, immediately addictive, and generating profit margins that dwarfed anything available through legitimate work in South Central. A dealer could start with almost no capital and be earning thousands per month within weeks. The trade-off was violence, competition for territory, and customers turned blocks into contested ground, and gangs that had existed for years reorganized their entire structure around the crack trade. This is the city Jemeker Thompson. When she was 8 years old, a landlord evicted her and her mother from their apartment in South Los Angeles. Workers threw their furniture and possessions into the street. Neighbors watched from windows. Thompson has described that moment, standing next to her mother's scattered belongings on the sidewalk, watching strangers look on, as the moment she decided she would never be in that position again. She did not frame it as ambition at the time. She framed it as survival. Money meant you could not be removed. Control meant no one could put you on the sidewalk. Those two ideas became the operating logic of everything she built afterward. She ran track in high school. She was disciplined, fast, and competitive. But the relationship that shaped her future was the one she had with Anthony Mosley, a marijuana dealer the neighborhood called Daff. He was older, had connections, and a reputation. Thompson began collecting payments for him. At first, that was the extent of it, but Thompson was paying close attention. She was learning who owed, who paid on time, who could be trusted, and who needed to be pressured. The mechanics of the operation were becoming familiar, and so was the logic that underpinned it. In a neighborhood where Reagan-era budget cuts had systematically defunded every legitimate path to stability, the drug trade was not a moral failure, but an economic calculation, one that a disciplined person with ambition could run more efficiently than most. By the time she was still in high school, Thompson had moved past marijuana and was personally moving 3 to 4 kilograms of cocaine per week. That number is worth pausing on. 3 to 4 kilos every single week while she was a teenager. That is not a girlfriend running errands. That is a volume that puts her in operational territory most street dealers never reach in their entire careers. She was pricing, distributing, collecting, and managing risk at a scale that required systems thinking, and she was doing it before she had graduated high school. She and Daff married in 1980. They bought a house in Encino. They had a son in 1982. From the outside, it looked like a couple who had done well. From the inside, it was a cocaine operation expanding faster than either of them had originally planned. What separated Thompson from almost every other woman in the crack economy was the position she held. Research on drug markets found that investigators and academics consistently assumed women occupied peripheral roles, storing product, transporting cash, acting as couriers. The actual authority, the supply chain, the enforcement, the decisions sat with men. Thompson was not in a peripheral role. She had the supplier relationships. She had the money. She was making the calls. Daff had brought her in, but Thompson had already made the operation her own. One former associate later recalled, Jemeker knew that she wanted money. She wanted success. She wanted stature. She wanted to be cool. And for a woman in that era, that meant smashing through a whole lot of barriers. Thompson herself was more direct about the scale she operated at. At that time, it was nothing for me to have 50 kilos of cocaine. By 1984, Thompson and Daff were moving product at a scale that had pulled DEA attention. Federal agents had documented the operation, the volume, the recurring patterns. They had a file on Jemeker Mosley. They were building towards something. And then, before they could move, the thing they expected to end the operation became the thing that accelerated it. Daff's murder, Thompson taking over and expanding nationally the hair business. In 1984, Anthony Mosley was outside washing his car when someone shot and killed him. He died at the scene. Investigators never officially established a motive. No one faced conviction. The case went nowhere. DEA agents who had been watching the operation at the time of Daph's death expected Thompson to step back. DEA agents who had been watching the operation at the time of Daph's death expected Thompson to step back. The conventional read was that the husband was remove him and the organization would fracture. Agents scaled back their surveillance focus and waited for the network to dissolve. It did not dissolve. Thompson consolidated the operation under her own name and her own authority. She absorbed Daph's supplier contacts and street-level relationships. She expanded distribution into states where the operation had not previously had a presence. She became the decision maker, not a placeholder, not a transitional figure. The organization was hers, and she ran it accordingly. Thompson later reflected on the moment without much emotion. "I never thought that I would lose that. The worst of the violence had kicked in. Somebody got killed in the game. It was chalked up to the game because that's the choice you made. It could have been me that got taken out." The DEA had to rebuild its file from scratch, now with Thompson as the primary subject rather than a secondary associate. The woman they had cataloged as the wife of the dealer was running the operation herself, and she was running it with more ambition than Daph had ever shown. What the murder also removed was whatever operational ceiling Daph had placed on the organization. Thompson had no ceiling. She wanted more territory, more distributors, more direct access to supply, so she built all three. The expansion was methodical. She did not try to control everything from Los Angeles. Instead, she identified buyers in other cities, people with their own customer bases and their own street-level infrastructure, and made herself their supplier. She recruited distributors across the country, running a network that stretched from Atlanta to Detroit, from St. Louis to Illinois. Each distributor handled their own market. Thompson handled the supply. The arrangement kept her insulated from the street-level transactions that got most dealers caught, and it gave her the kind of geographic reach that most Los Angeles traffickers never achieved. To feed that network, she cut out the domestic middlemen on the supply side entirely, going directly to the source. She began sourcing cocaine directly from producers in Colombia. This is not a small detail. Direct sourcing at that level requires relationships, trust, and demonstrated capacity, the ability to move volume consistently, pay reliably, and handle product at a scale that makes you worth dealing with. Thompson had all three. The profit margins on direct source product were substantially higher than buying through domestic brokers, and the supply was more stable. She was operating the supply chain of a serious enterprise. The hair business came next. At 26, she opened a wig and hair extension distribution company, marketing products to celebrities, giving herself a professional reason to travel between cities, handle large transactions, and maintain relationships with people across the country. Authorities later argued she used the business to launder drug proceeds. What it unambiguously did was give her legitimate cover, a paper trail that explained her income, her travel, and her network. A close contact who visited Thompson's Encino home during this period recalled, "I went over to her house and she had a Ferrari, a turbo Porsche, every car that you could ever fantasize about, a brand new swimming pool. She had a housekeeper. She had everything that most women dream about." Thompson has never denied what drove the accumulation. "Money was my power. Money was my control. And that's what controlled me, the money." The neighborhood where she grew up had evictions and sidewalk furniture. She had a swimming pool and a housekeeper in Encino, but none of that wealth existed without the distribution network running beneath it. And the network only kept running as long as every person inside it stayed loyal and stayed quiet. That was always the fragile part. Thompson understood it, which is why When the cracks finally appeared, she saw them coming before they opened all the way, the empire at its peak. Through the late 1980s, Thompson was running an organization that had outgrown anything she and Daff had originally built. The distribution network reached multiple states. The Colombian supply chain was producing volume at a level that kept her ahead of competitors. Federal agents described her as a significant trafficker by any measure, whether the comparison was Los Angeles, New York, or Chicago. She was moving product at a scale that placed her among the major players in the national crack economy, not just the local one. The organization worked because Thompson maintained strict discipline around money and product. Distributors who paid on time, moved volume, and kept quiet stayed in the network. Those who fell short got cut off, pressured, or made into examples. Associates recall a reputation for never tolerating missed payments. The operation had the structure of a functioning business: reliable supply, clear expectations, consequences for failures, which is exactly what kept it running for as long as it did. The hair business was central to making all of it look normal. Thompson's wig and hair extension company gave her a professional identity that explained away almost everything the drug operation required: travel between cities, large cash transactions, relationships with business people in multiple states. She was selling hair products to celebrities, attending industry events, keeping up the appearance of a Black woman entrepreneur doing well in the 1980s beauty economy. What no one outside the operation could see was that the business and the drug network ran on the same infrastructure, the same travel routes, the same financial channels, the same professional contacts. The hair company did not just hide the cocaine money, it made the cocaine operation easier to run. Thompson's travel circuit was where much of the real networking happened. Boxing matches in Las Vegas functioned as an informal industry gathering. Dealers from across the country in the same room, relationships forming outside any official business context. Thompson described the boxing circuit as her most productive networking environment. Whenever there was a fight in Las Vegas, I always made it my business to be at the fight, and all the drug dealers from all over the world were at the fight, and so I made a lot of connections. What made those connections work was the anonymity she maintained in rooms full of men who assumed they knew the hierarchy. Nobody knew who I was. Most of the men I met, I had more money than them, but they didn't know it. The invisibility was strategic. Thompson operated in a world where men assumed other men were the principals. A woman traveling for her hair business, attending fights in Vegas, socializing at industry events that read as commerce, not trafficking. It gave her room to move. It was through this circuit that she connected with Percy Cheese Bratton, a musician and bodyguard she eventually began a relationship with, who was based in Illinois. From 1988 to 1989, Bratton was taking product from Thompson. A pound here, 2 pounds, then 3, 5, 8, totaling approximately 33 pounds over a little more than 2 years. He was one of her best customers, and he represented the Midwest anchor of her distribution network. What Bratton also represented was exposure. Thompson had eventually become uncomfortable with the frequency of contact, too many calls, too much dependence, and had started pulling back from direct communication with him. As she later put it, Cheese kept on calling me, but I just didn't feel comfortable with talking to him anymore. The discomfort was correct. She had sensed the problem, but the trail had already been laid. In Alton, Illinois, a city of 25,000 people, large recurring wire transfers to Los Angeles were not difficult to notice. As one federal investigator later explained, she had him start to wire it through Western Union, which of course leaves a trail. Now, there's not a lot going on in Alton, Illinois, so therefore they don't have 400 cases to worry about. There are no narco traffickers running around. So the DA and the FBI, they see these payments going out, they picked up on it right away. Federal agents documented multiple Western Union money orders moving from members of the Bratton organization to Jemeker Mosley in Los Angeles. The wire transfers were the threat. Once investigators had the thread, they pulled it, and it ran straight back to Thompson's entire operation. When agents arrested Bratton with kilograms of cocaine in his vehicle, he faced a prison sentence long enough to reshape the rest of his life. He was a musician, a businessman, a man with a family. He cut a deal. His cooperation gave federal prosecutors the testimony and the financial documentation they needed to build the conspiracy case they had been unable to build on their own. Because Thompson had been careful enough to never appear directly in any transaction, never hold the product, never let anyone record her discussing it. She was the invisible center of the network. Bratton's testimony made her visible. The financial records from the hair business filled in the rest. Wire transfers, cash deposits, business accounts that moved more money than any hair extension company in a mid-sized Illinois city could plausibly generate. All of it was in the records, waiting to be examined by investigators who now knew exactly what they were looking at. In April 1991, a federal grand jury indicted Jemeker Thompson on charges of conspiracy to distribute cocaine and 5 counts of money laundering. The day the indictment came down, she was gone. What the record shows. Thompson spent 2 years as a fugitive. She traveled, used aliases, and maintained contact with her family from a distance. She monitored her son's life from wherever she was. The operation that had made her untouchable for nearly a decade had finally collapsed under the weight of a single cooperating witness. As one investigator put it, once the indictment comes down, she's gone. She actually disappears, leaves her son, tells you how serious this is. She had money, she had connections, she had the resources to stay underground indefinitely, and she knew how federal investigations worked well enough to know that distance was her best asset. By any operational logic, she should have stayed gone. In June 1993, she returned to Los Angeles for her son's 6th grade graduation. She wore a wig. She believed she could get in, watch the ceremony, and disappear again. She had misjudged one thing. Federal agents understood her as a mother just as clearly as they understood her as a trafficker, and they had called the school months in advance. Agents arrested her in the gymnasium in front of teachers and parents and her 12-year-old son. As one attorney who followed the case observed, Jemeker was never caught with drugs. She wasn't caught on a wiretap. She wasn't caught doing a drug deal, but other people were staring these 10+ year prison sentences in the face. And they cut deals and they pointed fingers at her in court at her trial. And that's what brought her and so many other people like her down. At trial, prosecutors convicted Thompson without ever catching her in possession of drugs, without a wiretap, without observing her conduct a transaction. They built the case entirely from financial records, wire transfer documentation, and the testimony of people inside her own network who had chosen survival over loyalty. Just before Christmas 1993, a federal judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison. She was 31 years old. She served 13 years at a maximum security federal facility. An administrative processing error initially placed her there alongside lifers, murderers, and inmates who would never leave, and the system kept her there for a year. She told no one what she was in for. She did not associate with the general population. Among the people she served time alongside were Griselda Blanco, the Colombian trafficker known as the godmother of cocaine, and Lynette Squeaky Frome, the Manson associate who attempted to assassinate Gerald Ford. The woman who had run Los Angeles's cocaine distribution network now shared a facility with people whose crimes had made international news. The wealth, The cars, the Encino house, the hair business, all of it was gone. What remained was a sentence and a son who visited monthly until he was 16 and then stopped. Prison stripped the operation down to what it had always actually been, a system built on other people's desperation and her willingness to manage that desperation for profit. The neighborhoods she had supplied kept dealing with the damage, addiction, violence, fractured families, long after she went to prison and long after her distributors had moved on to other arrangements. The crack she moved through those networks did not stay in the transaction. It stayed in the communities on the receiving end in ways that federal sentencing guidelines do not measure and documentary episodes do not linger on. During her early years in custody, Thompson began attending Bible study. She has described the process as gradual rather than sudden, not a conversion in a single moment, but a slow shift driven by the fact that she had nothing left to protect or defend. She started teaching other inmates. She ran prayer groups. She mentored younger women moving through the same facility. By the time she walked out in 2005, a church had ordained her as a minister. The moment she learned about her son's career became one of the more arresting details of her prison years. In her own words, and one day they were showing skateboarding and I just was watching it. They said, Anthony Mosley, pro skateboarder, Anthony Mosley. And then I'm looking and he looks identical to me. And I just started hollering and just going screaming. And I'm like, that's my son. That's my son. Her son had become a professional skateboarder. He had built a life entirely outside the world his mother had operated in. She had watched it happen from a prison TV. After her release in 2005, Thompson founded Second Chance Evangelical Ministries in South Central Los Angeles, the same neighborhoods where her operation had run. She began preaching in prisons, churches, and schools. She published a memoir, Queenpin, co-written with David Ritz in 2010. Netflix later featured her story in Druglords, and A&E profiled her in Gangsters, America's Most Evil. What the documentaries tend to frame as redemption is also something else, a record of how the same structural conditions that shaped Thompson, poverty, absent opportunity, the logic of the crack economy, continue producing the same results in the same neighborhoods for decades after her arrest. Federal agents dismantled the operation she ran. The conditions that made it possible remained. Federal prosecutors said at the time of her sentencing that she was lucky to receive 15 years, that the scope of her operation warranted more. The distributors she supplied served shorter terms and returned to communities still dealing with the drug trade she had helped build. Bratton, whose testimony brought her down, walked free after 2 years and 4 months. Thompson served 13. She never got caught with drugs. No wiretap recorded her. No agent observed her making a transaction. Prosecutors convicted her entirely on the words of people who had worked for her and the paper trail she had created when she stopped traveling to Illinois and told Bratton to wire the money instead. One decision, after years of operational discipline and careful insulation from street-level exposure, one moment of convenience produced a financial record that federal agents in a small Midwestern city noticed immediately because there was nothing else happening in Alton, Illinois that required their attention. The DEA had not outsmarted her. A quiet town with nothing else to investigate had handed them the threat. The organization is gone. The sentence has been served. The son is a professional athlete. The ministry is active. And somewhere in all of that is the unanswered question, the title already named. No one ever caught, charged, or publicly identified the men who killed Daft Mosley. Whether Thompson's expansion after his death constituted making them regret it, or whether they were ever part of her calculation at all, is something the record does not resolve. What the record shows is that she built something large enough to be called an empire, lost it to the one person she trusted most in Illinois, and spent 13 years in a maximum security federal prison before coming back to the same city and starting over from zero. The DEA got their conviction. South Central kept its problems, and the 8-year-old girl who watched her mother's furniture land on the sidewalk became a federal case study, a Netflix episode, and an evangelical minister, in that order.